Okay, I wanted to start off with a couple simple examples of this inverse trig notation or functions that we use to find exact values. So the directions are going to state, find the exact value of each of these functions. So when we find sine inverse of the square root of 2 over 2, again, we have to remember what quadrants our outputs are going to be in. So if you remember, sine inverse, its quadrant output would be quadrant 1. That's if this is a positive value, which it definitely is. Or it's going to put us in quadrant 4, again, if that were negative. So since this value is positive, we're going to have to give a quadrant 1 answer. Now, the square root of 2 over 2 should be a ratio you recognize, as is all these ratios. This 1/2, square root of 3 over 2, those things keep popping up time and time again. That's why it's so important to get these things memorized as soon as possible. So here's how we're going to play this. Sine inverse of the square root of 2 over 2 equals something. Now again, that something needs to be a quadrant 1 answer. But if sine inverse of the square root of 2 over 2 equals x, then what we must say is that the sine, normal sine of x is the square root of 2 over 2. Now, the question is, what Q1 angle, when you take the sine of it, gives you the square root of 2 over 2? Now, you might have known this right from the start, and again, you could punch this in on your calculator, but the idea is we have to know these by memory, as, well, we're not going to be allowed to use a calculator for the test on this section. So we've got to get these things memorized. So sine of x equals the square root of 2 over 2. If we are in quadrant 1, that can only be a 45-degree angle. So we could say x equals 45, or if we're talking radians, and we should get very familiar with this, or that is pi force. Right. Now when we go to problem 2, say cosine inverse of 1/2. Again, we're either talking quadrant 1 or we're talking quadrant 2. For cosine inverse, quadrant 1 if the value is positive, again, which it is, or you go to quadrant 2 if it's negative, and you've got to work through a reference angle. So the idea is, if cosine inverse of 1/2 is equal to a number, then the cosine of that number will equal 1/2. Question is, what quadrant 1, again, since it's positive up here, what quadrant 1 angle, if you take the cosine of it, gives you 1/2. So you can think, what, adjacent over hypotenuse, that would have to be a 60-degree angle, or we would say pi thirds in radians. Right? Same idea here. Tangent inverse of 1. We're either talking quadrant 1 or we're talking quadrant, 4. Quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. Again, this is going to be quadrant 1. Again, this value is positive. So we say, should have wrote out over there, but I guess we're skipping that step. The tangent of this number, the answer to this problem, the output of this problem should equal 1. Now, tangent of what value is 1? If you look at your chart, or if you get this thing memorized, again, I recommend we're going to have to be talking quadrant 1 here, because this value is positive. So therefore, we're looking at 45 degrees. Tangent of 45 degrees is equal to 1, or we could say that in terms of radians as pi force. Right?